Everyone, and thank you so much for joining our webinar this morning. My name is Buledi Sangwa, and I'm a Business Development Manager here at Quinyx, looking after the Warehouse, Logistics and Transportation Department. One of the things that we need to do as one of the leading workforce management software companies is to attend events which are educational, just so that we can understand what our customers need and what challenges that they face. I was fortunate enough to attend one of the leading events called Multimodal a few weeks ago, where there were some educational events happening. And there I met our guest speaker, Peter Ward. Peter has invaluable experience, having been within the industry for 20 years plus, and we're very lucky to have him here. He's now the CEO of the UK Warehousing Association, and in a moment I will be handing over to him. But just before we go, just would like to say that it would be possible for you to be able to ask any questions. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in during under the questions tab. And I will now hand over to Peter. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Buledi, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and delivering this webinar for you. If we move into our first slide, let me just start by welcoming those members of UKWA that are joining this morning, and others obviously interested in this topic. I'm conscious that we have probably a fairly mixed audience this morning, and some of you may have seen some of these slides previously, particularly those that have been on the conference circuit and attended events such as Multimodal. And so on. So just a quick introduction to the UK Warehousing Association for those not so familiar. We're a business-to-business trade association, acting now really as the voice of the logistics industry here in the UK. We have around 700 members, and that number is growing currently. Clearly, the logistics sector is very important in the UK economy, employing about 1 in 12 people. And I also, on the card there, put mention of the International Federation to which we belong, and to which all of our members, through their membership of UKWA, have access. And the reason for that will become clear as we get further into the presentation, which will really focus on some of the global issues, trends, challenges. And I mention that because this really is a global business, and we find ourselves reminding even sometimes some of the most modest of our smaller SME members who very focused on what they do here in their niche operations in the UK, sometimes don't realise that they are part of a much bigger picture, being the end-to-end international and global supply chain that we're operating in. Forgive the typo at the centre of this slide. That should say technology-enabled consumers. And I'll use this just as an introduction to the next sort of section of the agenda this morning, which is really just to paint the picture of the very fragile, uncertain and changing world that we're operating in today. Driven largely by a new breed of consumer sitting at the middle of all of that. And the question that we pose and talk to with our members and the wider industry most frequently is, really, is all of this change presenting an opportunity for the third-party logistics sector and the logistics industry in the UK? or is it a threat? And really to evaluate where the opportunities are, and to help the industry and our members manage any of the risks. Let's start with the elephant in the room. This is a slide that we've had in the slide deck for probably the last 18 months, 2 years. We knew that the Brexit referendum was coming. We clearly, like many people, didn't expect the outcome. And it's still in the slide deck. Of course, we're all concerned and working hard now to help the government with the detail that they require from our business in taking the UK into a new world post-Brexit. As UK WA, we're very active in that on a number of issues. I won't dwell on the specifics of that today, but our message really, as the pivotal point between the policymakers in Westminster and you people in the industry and our members is the government and the policymakers really need a level of detail. The devil on all of this is really in the detail. Our message to them is you're not going to find that level of detail from the academics in Westminster or the think tanks in the civil service in the way that you perhaps have traditionally. This is very complex, and the detail that you need will come from the people at the coalface. In other words, our members and practitioners in the industry. And our message to those practitioners is, you know, engage with us through this process. This is your opportunity now to step up and actually be part of shaping the future of this country for future generations. So we're very active on a number of issues regarding Brexit. We're also very conscious of some of the impacts that we've seen already in the last 12 months since the referendum. We've seen the devaluation of the pound. I know it bounces around a little bit, but it's been you know, down below 20% at one point from its value pre-referendum. It's pegged its way back a little bit more recently. We believe that the full impact of this, some of the signs are starting to show now with factory door pricing in Asia. John Lewis, for example, announced a couple of weeks ago their latest results, and they laid one of the reasons for some shrinking margins at the door of this inflationary tendency now in terms of their overseas sourcing as a result of the value of the pound. And again, we're somewhat concerned around some of the schoolboy economics that tends to come out of Westminster, where this lower value of pound is put out there as a positive because it's going to make our exports cheaper. Clearly, we're a net importing economy, and the elasticity of demand for those imports is fairly tight, and therefore we expect some inflationary tendencies to come through in the market as that factory door pricing in our major sourcing markets increases. Clearly, some of the key commodities that run logistics, such as the price of fuel, is also a dollar-based commodity. And again, when all of the hedging of currency that tends to be probably a 12 to 18 month cycle comes through, we can expect to see some inflation in the system as a result of this. Likewise, very volatile stock markets around the world. I think the key point here is how quickly these things tend to ripple around the world. You know, someone sneezes in London and the Nikkei takes a hit, or something happens in New York and it affects the stock markets in London and other places. And the other point that we continually remind our members of is the media tend to pick up and put numbers out there really around the FTSE 100. Keep in mind that the FTSE 100 companies are largely companies that are digging stuff out of the ground and selling it in dollars. So the FTSE 100 has held up very, very well. If you want a more accurate measure of what's happening on the ground within the UK economy, perhaps the FTSE 250 is a better benchmark, and you'll see that there's quite a bit of uncertainty and volatility in those markets. We are also getting used to a new style of politics. It seems now that you can have an idea and go and get elected, and then form the machine to go behind it based on your idea, and put the whole sort of machine together afterwards, which is quite interesting. The other thing that's interesting is, again, some of the political unrest. This is Turkey, just this time 12 months ago. Who would believe that a country that is looking to be the next entrant to the EU, and by the way is a current member of the Customs Union, which is obviously a big part of our discussions with government and the whole Brexit negotiation, military coup fortunately was avoided and some level of stability restored. But another example of some of the fragility that exists just not too far beyond our doorstep. The other thing that's going on out there, of course, is the whole Middle East situation, the largest humanitarian crisis probably in the last 70 years. This has dropped away from the headlines at the moment, I think, in the media here because of some of the more prevalent issues. But clearly, this is of great significance, and particularly for those of us, all of us, practicing in these global supply chains. Keep in mind the importance of the Suez Canal as a main artery of the trade route between the Far East and Northwest Europe, and the uncertainty and risk and fragility around that whole Middle Eastern region in the context of the Suez Canal, and what the potential impact of any risk to that artery would be in terms of additional transit times and additional cost of shipping lines having to put more vessels in to maintain a service integrity if that were to become close. So something, again, that we're keeping an eye on very closely. Some other world leaders out there, we're sort of unsure of what their next move might be. It's a little over 12 months now since the situation in Ukraine and Crimea, and again, we're not quite sure what Mr. Putin's moves are, nor are we too sure what this gentleman is doing, letting off all sorts of nasty things out into Korea, and there are obviously political agendas to try and get some of these things, you know, under control. And then if we look to the West, this is a really interesting situation in terms of global trade and global supply chains. It was on the third day of his election to office of president that Mr. Trump ripped up the Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement and nailed his colours very, very firmly to the mast in terms of his view on global trade agreements through that. The rhetoric regarding the trade between the US and Mexico has been well documented. The whole America First rhetoric is well known. Interesting that this has created a little bit of an international spat between North America and China. Mr. Trump put out the messages that, you know, watch these Chinese, they're having the lunch off your table, and the Chinese retaliated with a $29 million fine on General Motors for some fairly inconsequential issue around trading rights and so on. So you've got the two biggest economies in the world sort of sparring with each other. And Mr. Trump, it would seem, becoming more and more inwardly focused on America First, to possible risk of other things around the world. Our focus, on the other hand, is turning us more towards China. We've seen the $129 billion sort of announcement of China's investment into infrastructure to build the One Belt, One Road initiative in a westerly direction. China believing that within the next 10 years they can be trading with over 63% of the world's population and over 35% of the world's merchandise trade. So sort of warnings there. We've got sort of opposed views. Mr. Trump to the West tending to become more inwardly focused, and yet the Chinese to the East becoming very outwardly focused and very much encouraging further growth in their global trading arrangements.
So, Peter, if I may ask, we've gone through quite a few different factors there, which are quite challenging, I guess, for anyone that's looking in terms of transportation, logistics, and even indeed warehousing. Which one of these would you say are the biggest or most fragile factors, and why?
I think all of those are fragile factors of which we need to be aware. I think the one that probably will affect the logistics industry and have the greatest effect is probably the volatility around the value of sterling. It will have an impact on the consumer in terms of pricing of goods and cost of imports and cost of fuel. So I think the value of sterling is probably the most significant for the industry.
Thank you.
Just moving on to just a view of the demographics. Again, some of you may have seen some of this before. We've done quite a bit of work now with the likes of Oxford Economics and KPMG Futures Institute, and whoever of these experts you talk to, it's clear that the world's population is growing from 6.8 billion today to over 9 billion by 2050. Another elephant in the room, of course, that reared its head during the recent general election is the matter of social care. Reason for that, 1 in 10 people in this time frame will be over 80 years of age. And in that same time frame, and it's already the evidence is starting to come through very much in the UK market now, by 2050, 1 in 3 people will be over the age of 65. So some very interesting dynamics there within the demographics of global population. The interesting one for us from a logistics point of view is the trend that's growing around the world for a lot of that population, and KPMG and Oxford Economics reckon probably around 45% of that population are looking to live in and around towns and cities. So this drift towards urbanization is the combination of a growing population and an aging population, sure, but growing population combined with a drift towards the urban conurbations is a major consideration for the logistics industry.
So, Peter, what impact do you feel this will have on the availability of workforce, and specifically when we're talking about the workforce for warehousing and logistics? Is this something that your members are currently talking about?
Very much so, and at the moment it's a big concern within the logistics industry, which itself has an aging workforce. The average age within the logistics industry is somewhere in age 50 plus. We have a real big job on our hands, and it's a major part of UKWA's brief to educate the younger part of that growing population that here's an industry that is an attractive career proposition, and to try and bring more youngsters into the industry. But a combination of skills and labour shortage is a big issue for us, for sure.
What would you say that your members are currently doing to be able to, first of all, attract those younger members and retain those younger members as well?
Well, it is about just making them aware of the industry. That's the starting point. This is this is an industry that effectively feeds and clothes the nation. And I guess if you asked, took a survey of 100 sixth form students, you might have 1% that's heard about the logistics industry. We don't promote it. We don't talk about it. It's not visible as a career, as an attractive career opportunity. So that's something that we have to focus on. Just coming back to the urban drift, population growth, we have clear evidence here in the UK. Our own population growing from 65 million to 70 million. In fact, I think the ONS put some figures out last week of another million on the UK population in the last 5 years. That's now been published. London, I don't want to make this a London-centric presentation by any means, but is a living example of what's going on in and around the major cities around the world. And whilst we're looking at some numbers here for London, this could equally be Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, Glasgow in the next few years, and it's certainly New York, Sao Paulo, Shanghai, some of the major cities on a global basis. Increasing population expected to go from around 8 million as we are currently to over 11 million in the next 15 years. And of course the other trend that many of the major cities have, and particularly London, it's not just the population that live in and around the city, it's the visitor numbers. And again, London is expecting to beat all previous records, probably triggered this year by the low value of the pound as well, but over 20 million visitors coming into London this year. And then there's people like us that come in and out of London for our work a few days a week, and again a rising trend there where the commuter level is expected to exceed 1 million commuters per day at some point this year. So a phenomenal pressures on our current infrastructure, and again we've done quite a lot of work on this. You can find all the evidence in our Feeding London report showing that actually, we have to rethink some of the logistics as those trends change towards more local convenience shopping and the growth of the online business against those trends of growing population and increasing urbanisation, because the infrastructure is already creaking and it clearly will not sustain these levels of growth. The next thing I wanted to talk about, sorry, we seem to, the titles of the slide there has slipped slightly. Phenomenal that there's been this incredible drive and growth of consumerism in the last 10 years, and the fact that it is less than 10 years since Steve Jobs stood up in California with an iPhone and said this will change everything. And how right he was to foresee that. And the pictures on the right-hand side of the slide here, just to illustrate, not only is it changing the lives of us as consumers in the Western world, where we've kind of evolved through various models of consumerism, high street shopping, out of town, into the world of e-commerce and so on. This has opened up a whole new world of consumers, particularly in China, where as a result of this technology, 750 million new consumers have evolved, all technology enabled, all able now to shop online, hence the growth of the Alibabas and the JD.coms and the other big internet retailing models that are evolving in China. Of course, the big difference between those people and us Westerners, these people have never been inside a grocery store, don't know what the inside of Marks and Spencer's or Selfridges look like, but they are totally enabled now to be buying on a global basis. And I dropped this one into the presentation. This is an interesting one, just again to illustrate the speed at which all of this is happening. In 1878, when Alexander Bell invented the telephone, it took 78 years for the telephone to reach 100 million consumers worldwide. I think the television that came along sometime later was probably half of that time. But if you look at some of these timeframes, particularly on the bottom part of the slide, since the introduction of the internet in the early mid 1990s, how quickly now you can reach 100 million consumers, and this latest sort of app, the Candy Crush app, that took just over 1 year to reach 100 million users worldwide, is quite phenomenal. But it does give you some idea of the pace of change that we are now experiencing in our sort of everyday lives.
So if I could ask you, Peter, you've seen the different technologies and how long it took for them to be adopted. Could you draw any parallels in terms of technology being used within the warehousing and logistics world and its adoption?
I don't think the logistics industry is quite there yet, and that's sort of where we're at the moment, and that's where we're seeing perhaps the industry on the cusp of some change, because I think we're in a situation now where it is, for the logistics industry that traditionally has been a very labour-intensive industry, to sort of wake up and smell the coffee, and against that background of some shortages and pinch points on the workforce, skills, labour, and so on, is actually looking at technology and saying, how do we make this, how do we use this technology to become more efficient in what we're doing. So it's absolutely top of the agenda right now in the industry. For these reasons, again, as depicted by the slide here, we've used that original graphic there again, and we're saying, logistics effectively is the new retail, and again, lot more to logistics than just retail. But taking a UK perspective on this, 75% of the logistics activity in the UK relates to the consumer, which you could loosely call kind of retail. So it is a massive part of the industry, and we have these new models coming into the market, the Amazon effect, Amazon coming from the West, and as I mentioned, Alibaba and what they've been developing around Asia Pacific, and particularly China, coming from the East. So again, a kind of summary there in terms of this fragile and uncertain world that we're in, driven by the consumer, but definitely a lot of that consumerism now being fulfilled through distribution centres and fulfillment centres, rather than the high street store as we knew it a few years ago. So logistics, in some way, replacing some of that footprint that's reduced in the high street. We've seen the closure of Debenham stores recently, and announcements for Marks and Spencer's to close more stores, and yet logistics space is growing. And if you talk to any of the industrial agents, we actually had a real estate advisory board just in the last 2 weeks, hosted by Colliers International, one of our associate members in the real estate world. All of the trends are that logistics space is coming under more and more pressure as it replaces some of that high street footfall. And of course, some of that, the job losses in the high street are being replaced by the growth in the logistics industry. And I think what I'd like to do is sort of move on and say, well, what's that actually doing to the logistics sector per se? And those that have been involved, like myself, in the industry for a year or two, we've all been to the conferences, and we've all seen the big 3PL presentations and so on and so forth. And we've probably seen many slides and websites and brochures that look a little bit like this slide, where it's all in the past been drawn out as a very simple linear process. We buy this stuff from vendors in China, we take it to a third-party logistics provider, we put it in containers, either full loads or consolidation, take it to a port, put it on a ship, ship it through, bring it into a DC, process it, pick it, dispatch it out into the high street or final customer delivery. a linear process as it was. I think that has now changed. We now have, excuse me, a very complex global ecosystem of supply chains, what I would call the multi-pace, multi-route channels to market. Merchandise moving at different speeds, up and down supply chains, sometimes going in a reverse direction, multitude of routes and transportation modes, and so on. Again, all being driven, by this consumer that is sitting at the centre of everything and calling all of the shots. Logistics, the new retail. And I think this is recognised within the retail sector. This is a headline that Logistics Manager put out not too long ago. Only 17% of retail chief executives believe their supply chains are optimal. And against this background of evolving from this less complex, I wouldn't call it simple, but less complex linear process to this global, very complex, multi-pace, multi-channel ecosystem, that is hardly a surprise. So this level of complexity is kind of calling for a greater level of flexibility and agility. And what we actually see happening is, within the third-party logistics sector, is a sort of shift of emphasis, really, from managing transportation on an A to B sort of basis, much more now about managing inventory. And because some of those pressures that I mentioned earlier, the evolution of 750 new consumers in China particularly, this again is putting some additional pressures on some of the traditional sourcing practice, where buyers from the Western world would go into China and place orders for quantities that were ideal for them, in time frames that were ideal for them, and are now finding the vendors in China are giving much less flexibility in those order cycles. The fact that they've now got a large and growing middle market to serve in China, which is their priority, there's a lot of pressure coming through on the retail buyers, where they're having to look at different minimum order quantities and different time frames. So rather than buying in perfect lot sizes to feed into, for example, a Christmas peak season, buying in FOB Yantian in June, July to ship into Western Europe during July and August, to then feed into the retail networks in August, September time to build stock for the Christmas consumer, those vendors are no longer able to meet those timeframes. They've got other considerations, and so there's a big trade-off that the retail buyers have to face. How do I adjust these minimum order quantities, and if I'm going to take this stock and actually buy effectively out of season, where do I put it? Do we bring all of that stock through and let the supply chain director and the logistics guys in market worry about all of that, or do I try and hold some stock in origin, or do I do some clever kind of sea air moves and ship some via Dubai and hold some there and then trickle it in as we need it? Whatever, everybody has different set of dilemmas here, but the reality is that this is putting a lot of increased pressure on the third-party logistics market. And coupled to those sourcing things, then you've got this explosion of channels into that final consumer. So the model of bringing everything into one nice big centralized distribution center sitting in the middle of the country, and then pushing it out into trucks on a Monday, Wednesday and Friday or whatever to go and replenish high street stores has also changed. Where at destination, when you get the goods into market, you've now got to, certainly for most retailers, fulfill a number of high street stores on the old model, but you've also got to provide click and collect facilities and process online orders on an overnight basis, and in some cases get stock within an hour of the consumer to be able to fulfill next morning or next hour deliveries. just to remain competitive with the kind of services that are being provided on that basis by the likes of Amazon and so on. So a much greater call now in terms of agility and flexibility, calling for multiple stocking locations rather than the critical mass at single locations of the past. And this is where, you know, we would say that this is opening up opportunities for the third-party logistics sector to respond to that and to be able to provide solutions to those retailers where maybe some shared user, multiple location solutions are more effective than big investment in infrastructure. The other thing that's actually changing is the configuration of the actual buildings themselves. So as we move from this sort of largely critical mass-driven traditional warehouse distribution center operation to more small pick, what I would call the order factory model, this is also changing the shape, size and configuration of the building themselves, the mechanical handling equipment that goes in them, and indeed the type of labour force that is required to manage those facilities. And again, one of the roles of UKWA here, in terms of our lobbying, it's not just about making the policymakers aware of these things, it's actually making the investment community aware of this as well. This was a big theme that came through at our recent real estate advisory board, to have the investors, the big institutional investors, understand actually that the model is changing from building, you know, big 300, 400,000 square foot buildings, 15 metres eave side, 10% office content, X number of car parking spaces, and so on. This is changing radically. The site density is changing. The whole building configuration is changing, and particularly on managing the labour force in some of these new style fulfilment type of activities. And that was certainly one of the things that had us interested in pursuing the discussions with Quinyx and the solutions that they provide in the marketplace for sort of workforce management and so on. And we'd highly recommend you have a look at the Quinyx offer in terms of some of the applications that they have in managing the workforce. The other thing, of course, is about location. And as I mentioned, the trend to try and get more and more distribution centres closer to the consumer, and this again, big topic for UKWA at the moment in terms of lobbying the policymakers and having particularly those responsible for planning and land use aware that, you know, if you're going to build 240,000 new homes, that's 240,000 new home delivery addresses. And a population that are likely to be doing their grocery shopping in a Sainsbury's local or a Tesco Express, which requires, you know, daily, hourly replenishment. Have you considered logistics, and where are the logistics centres going to go in this new consumer world that we're living in? So huge pressures on land at the moment that we are sort of aware of and talking about in the industry. So bringing that to some form of summary, we clearly see new demands on the logistics industry. As I mentioned, the global sourcing trends are changing. Buyers are having to manage these trade-offs between cost, speed, frequency, reliability, and so on. Looking at those sort of demand forecast requirements versus those minimum order quantities, lots of things happening on a global basis. And as I said at the beginning, this is a sharp reminder to some of our sort of smaller members that perhaps aren't quite as aware and au fait with the big global supply chain of some of the larger members may be. We are part of a big global picture, and some of those impacts that we talked about at the beginning are going to have an effect on our business. Not just a UK issue, but a worldwide issue is the manpower. This globally growing population. Sorry, someone's phone's gone off here, and that's mine. I thought I turned it off, so please excuse me for that. The manpower situation is a big issue for us, and as Belady alluded to earlier, where are we on the cycle now of introducing automation and robotics and technology into the industry? And again, UKWA is addressing this through some of our advisory boards in terms of technology, seeing that there's a huge opportunity for the industry now to sort of up the game and start embracing some of this. And I think, as is the way with these things, there'll be some early adopters and there'll be leaders and followers in that process. But the logistics industry has to change and embrace that. So this whole sort of unprecedented call for agility and flexibility is posing that big question in the market. Where do I hold stock, and how do I manage this, and how do I sort of keep all of the visibility around that and optimize that stock without just taking so much of it onto the balance sheet. Finding warehouse space in the right place is clearly the growing challenge amongst others. So just one kind of parting thought, and those of you may have seen these buildings that have been involved in the international logistics business. Two buildings in Hong Kong. The one on the left there is the famous iconic ATL building, 13 floors of 1 million square feet of warehousing and logistics, simply because of the pressure on land to handle logistics. It's not a new facility. The ATL building is probably 35, 40 years old now. The more recent development, the picture on the right-hand side, is a Goodman development. The Interlink building, just on the Stonecutter Bridge there, 23 floors of logistics. You can just see the circular piece of that building on the left-hand side, which is the dual carriageway kind of ramp going up to all 23 floors. And I put that in there because I think it won't be too long before we see some form of multi-story logistics here in the UK, possibly in and around London, simply because of the pressure that there is on land to get so much of this logistics absolutely in the right place. So I'll leave that with you as a kind of final thought. And I think the plan now is to open the webinar up for some questions.
Perfect. We do have a couple of questions from two people that are waiting there. But before we do that, I just wanted to get some of your thoughts in terms of workforce management. Obviously, we're a workforce management software company. There's a lot of technology that's adopted when it comes to being very efficient in terms of the way that we're moving goods, in terms of the way that within a warehouse that things are stored and so on. But I still find myself going to some of these big companies and in terms of the workforce management, in terms of the efficiency of that, we still tend to fall behind. What do you think that is? What do you think that we're, as an industry, being slow to take up to that sort of technology?
I think there are a number of factors involved there. I think the logistics industry has historically been one of those where to manage the peaks and troughs that get thrown at the industry, it's always been solved by just throwing labour, at the issue, whatever the issue is. I don't want to get too involved in the kind of politics of the industry per se, but the industry also typically works off extremely slim margins. And one thing that we, as the trade association, on behalf of the industry, are continually advocating is, there's a lot of this that clearly isn't sustainable, and there has to be some structural change in the industry. We can't allow particularly the retailers, to continue to squeeze the pips out of the industry if we are going to continue to be the robust and resilient industry that we've always been, where we've responded to every issue and problem that's thrown at us, and we continue, as I say, to feed and clothe the nation. Those retailers, and indeed to a degree the consumer, will have to pay more for that level of sustainability to exist. A lot of it, I think, the consumer would be prepared to pay for. I think, again, not sort of getting too involved in the politics of it, but the UK is over-retailed, if I can put it that way, and a lot of this drive for this insatiable appetite to drive down high street or consumer pricing is nothing more than a war of attrition between the retailers. Too many of them, too much floor space, and so on. But the structural change has to come to allow the industry to invest in the technology that it needs to support this greater level of complexity going forward. But in answer to your question, historically, it's been a fairly traditional industry where it manages itself on very much a labour basis. And so, there's a lot of inefficiency just through managing some complex operations on a spreadsheet. In many instances, many members that I might go and visit, a spreadsheet would be seen as being quite advanced.
Right. Okay. Thanks for that. We have 2 questions. Remember, if you want to ask a question, you could just type in the question tab. The first one is, having been in the industry for so long, what would you say was your biggest challenge when you first started, and how do they differ to now?
I've been in the industry for about 40 years, and of course, when I came into the industry, there was no internet. Mobile phone technology was probably on the cusp of development. And I think, the biggest challenge in my early days in my career in the industry was actually communication, really, between business to business communication. And then even really before the World Wide Web as we know it today, there were the forerunners, the introduction of emails and so on. But let's not forget, in the last 10 to 20 years, the advances that have been made in bringing together all of that communication and talking and sharing data with partners on a global basis now, we very much take for granted. It's instant access, it's 24/7, it's real time, and we just assume now that it's there and it's a commodity. That wasn't available to me in my early days in the industry. So that was a big challenge for sure.
Thank you, Peter. We've got a second question, which is, what would be your advice to somebody thinking about coming into the industry?
I would say, come on in. This is a great industry. The industry is not about old boys in brown coats with clipboards wandering around, or forklift truck drivers. This now is probably second to the technology industry itself. This is going to be the next it already is for me, the most exciting place to be. This is the industry that makes everything tick, But we need young talent, and we need technology savvy young people to come into the industry to make this work, and we need engineers and designers and planners and analysts and everything else. But we need the techie people in the industry to make this work. And interestingly, I mean, I've got 2 kids now forging their careers in their early 20s, and when they were coming out of college and so on, I was saying to them, what about a career in logistics? And sort of got strange look back across the dinner. So no, that's not for us, Dad. And I said, so you wouldn't want to work at Amazon then, or Google, or Apple, or Virgin, or any of these? Oh yeah, we'd work for them. well, what do you think they're doing? What do you think Amazon is? You know, so it is about making the youngsters aware of what this industry is now, and bringing that talent in.
Perfect. We'll just wait a few more moments, just in case anyone has any more questions. But thank you so much, Peter, for that. Really insightful.
No, pleasure. Just to sort of round off, actually, some of what I've been discussing this morning has been discussed at a couple of recent advisory boards within UKWA. We had a session at John Lewis's automated facility in the last month, a meeting of our technology and technology advisory board, and just more recently our real estate advisory board. The members of UKWA and those that are in our on our mail list will probably see our June news rack coming out later on today. There'll be some links actually to the reports of both of those meetings, which if you're interested in picking up on any further detail, there's a bit more in terms of what we've been discussing in the background. I think we might have a couple of questions coming in, which I'll see if we can answer. Just bear with us a moment.
Yep. So we have a question which says, do you see a future where we combine warehousing locations alongside or below residential space in order to optimize space in urban conurbation?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. We had a couple of hours on this only last week, actually, at the real estate meeting. Absolutely, I think it's been dubbed on the conference circuit as beds and sheds. But certainly, those multi-storey buildings, I can definitely see developments in urban areas like London where you're going to have a multi-storey development. Logistics perhaps on the underground and first couple of floors, separated by some retail and leisure from some residential above. And indeed, one of the outputs of our meeting last week was to just see if we could develop a more realistic concept around that. So that's something that we're working on, and I do see that in the future, most definitely.
Perfect. We got another one in as well. How do we get national governments full of career politicians to understand the needs of the logistics industry? Tread carefully now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a great question, and it's something that we're working really hard on. I mentioned in the sort of preamble there at the beginning, about the devil being in the detail on Brexit, and actually maybe Brexit might just be the catalyst for this, because this really has been an ongoing challenge to get the ear of government, and I don't think it's something that's exclusive to the logistics industry. I talk to my sort of peer group in some of the other non-logistics trade associations, and everyone sort of comes up with the same answer. It's very difficult to keep a minister in the room when you start talking about detail. I'm hoping that the serious nature of Brexit and the complexities of Brexit will change that landscape, and that they will listen to us, and we will get their ear. But it is a massive challenge. It's a really good question. But this is where engagement with trade association that's sort of putting itself up to the plate to be the voice of the industry. This is what we're there to do, and we'll keep knocking those doors and keep knocking those barriers down as best we can.
Great answer. And we had another question from Brian, who's asked whether the webinar has been recorded or will it be repeated. We will definitely. It has been recorded, and we'll be sending and following up with everyone that's participated today. But you will get a recording of today's webinar. Okay, so I think that we are done with the questions there as well. Peter, thank you so much again for joining us this morning. Very insightful. I think that the future is bright, indeed. But as a technology practitioner, I think that there are some ways in which we can make sure that when the margins are getting slimmer, that we can apply. And
sure.
We certainly will be wanting to speak to a lot of your members to make sure that we talk about our solution and how we may be able to help them in that way as well.
I think you'll get a good response, because I think everyone is now looking to say, how do we make our operations more efficient?
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Peter.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining this morning, and we'll be speaking with you soon. We're going to be having some more webinars coming up, so watch out for those. But really appreciate your attendance this morning, and have a great day. Take care. Thanks. Bye.